What if the eerie whispers of a child held the key to a long-buried truth? Imagine a little boy no older than 4, claiming to know secrets about a mother he never knew. Secrets buried deep beneath the earth. My real mother is in the well. He says, his voice as steady as if he's merely recounting a bedtime story. But there's no bedtime story here. There's only a chilling mystery. One that even his adoptive parents, Ella and Daniel, are unwilling to face. Ethan's tale is not the usual child's fantasy. It's a memory of a mother, Anna, who in his vivid recollections wore a blue dress, a mother who fell into a well, her voice silenced by the cold, unyielding earth. But how could he remember something so specific, something so haunting when he was only a toddler at the time? Was it just a child's wild imagination, or was Ethan speaking the truth? Ella and Daniel, his adoptive parents, laugh it off at first. After all, children often invent stories. They brush off his unsettling words with a dismissive chuckle and a shake of the head. He probably heard some ghost story. Daniel suggests, eager to dismiss the strangeness. But Ella, despite her skepticism, feels a lingering unease. She's seen the way Ethan's eyes, when they fixate on something, seem far older than his years. As if buried within them is a knowledge that no child should possess. Despite the laughter and the calm reassurances from his parents, Ethan's insistence never wavers. He doesn't falter in his conviction that his real mother, the one he remembers, is in the well. But what's even more unnerving is that his memories don't stop there. He recalls more than just the fall. He remembers the sadness in her eyes, the way she used to sing to him, the touch of her hair. It's all so real to him. Too real for a child who's only just learning how to navigate the world. And then the unthinkable happens. The more Ethan speaks of his past, the more details emerge. One day he draws a picture, a crude yet powerful depiction of a woman, in a blue dress, falling into a dark, endless hole. The drawing is not something a child should know how to create. It's filled with a rawness that speaks of trauma, of loss, and of a life cut short. As Ella stares at the image, her heart skips a beat. How could Ethan, a child of only 4, have such clear and precise memories of something that happened before he could even form a complete sentence? The truth starts to form like a shadow, growing ever larger. And with it, the chilling question, is it possible that Ethan's memories are not just dreams, but remnants of a truth that no one wanted to acknowledge? Something that has been buried for too long. The deeper Ella looks into her son's past, the more she realizes that the story he's telling might not be a figment of imagination. It might be the key to unraveling a mystery far darker than she ever could have imagined. The well that Ethan speaks of, it may hold the answers they all dread to uncover. At first, Ella and Daniel dismiss Ethan's eerie statements as the fanciful imaginings of a young child. After all, children are known for their wild imaginations and strange stories. Daniel especially brushes off his adopted son's claim with a laugh, dismissing it as a childish fantasy. Kids are always making up silly things. He scoffs, his voice carrying the nonchalance of someone who believes they know better. But what he doesn't know, what he refuses to acknowledge, is that sometimes children say things they don't fully understand. But those words are not mere fantasies. They are often a mirror of something far deeper. Something the adult mind is not ready to comprehend. Ella, however, cannot shake the unease creeping into her mind. While Daniel laughs off Ethan's claims with ease, Ella can't help but feel a chill whenever Ethan repeats his strange words. "My real mom is in the well," he continues to say with the certainty of someone who knows something he should not. Ella watches him closely, noticing that his tone never wavers, and there's a depth in his eyes that unnerves her. He is not just a child telling tales, he is a boy who insists on the truth of his words, despite the ridicule from those around him. Despite her initial efforts to convince herself that Ethan's claims are harmless, Ella begins to notice something strange. The details in Ethan's stories become sharper, more vivid with each passing day. His words are no longer mere ramblings. He talks about his real mother with an unsettling clarity that shouldn't be possible for a child so young. He describes her long dark hair, her blue dress, and the way she fell into the well behind their house. How could he know such things, especially since he was only a toddler when it all supposedly happened? The memories Ethan shares are not vague or dreamlike. They are precise and coherent. more like recollections from a much older person than a 4-year-old child. And each time Ethan speaks of his real mother, there is a sadness in his voice that Ella cannot ignore. It is as if he remembers the grief of loss, the helplessness of a child whose mother was taken from him in the most tragic way. But how could he remember something that happened before he even understood the world? Ella's initial skepticism begins to falter, and she becomes more and more uncomfortable with the growing certainty in Ethan's words. It's one thing to dismiss a child's outlandish ideas. But it's another thing entirely when those ideas start to make sense, when the child begins to speak with such conviction that it feels like a haunting truth, not a fairy tale. She begins to question everything she thought she knew about Ethan's past. She recalls the day they first met him at the orphanage. He was small, fragile, and full of questions. But at the time, he seemed like any other orphan, a child who needed a home, a family. What was it about his past that made him speak of a mother buried in the well behind their house? As Ella's doubts deepen, she begins to look at Ethan differently. She starts noticing small things, his strange way of staring off into space at times, as if lost in a memory. Only he can see his tendency to speak about things that don't quite add up. It's the way he speaks of his real mother, without hesitation, without fear. He talks about her as if she were still with him, as if their bond had not been severed by time or death. And every time he says, "She's in the well," Ella's stomach tightens and the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. There's a coldness to his words, a certainty that he is not making it up. Daniel, however, remains firm in his belief that it's all nonsense. He tells Ella to stop worrying, to stop letting a child's odd ideas unsettle her. He's just a kid. Ella, kids make up all kinds of things. He'll forget about it soon enough, he says dismissively. But Ella cannot let go. She can't help but feel that something is wrong, that there's more to this story than they've been led to believe. It's as if Ethan is trying to tell them something that has been buried deep in the past, but neither she nor Daniel are ready to hear it. In the quiet of the night, Ella begins to lose sleep over it. She lies awake staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. Could Ethan's memories be real? Could there be more to his story than simple fantasy? She thinks back to the day they adopted him, the day they first brought him into their home. Could it be that there's something about his past, something dark that they are unwilling to face? A nagging voice in the back of her mind tells her that they should investigate further, that they should dig deeper into Ethan's history. But Daniel is adamant that she shouldn't entertain such ideas. "Don't stir up trouble, Ella. You're just making this worse," he warns her. But Ella can't shake the feeling that something is terribly wrong. As Ethan's memories become more detailed, more vivid, she starts to feel as though the past is closing in on her. What if Ethan is remembering something that Daniel has tried so hard to bury? What if the well behind their house holds secrets that no one wants to uncover? The idea becomes an obsession for Ella, and she begins to search for answers, slowly piecing together the fragments of Ethan's past. But with every new piece she uncovers, the truth becomes even harder to bear. As the weight of her discoveries presses down on her, Ella can no longer deny it. There is something buried in the well, and Ethan knows it. He is not just a child with a wild imagination. He is a boy who remembers the truth, a truth that has been hidden for far too long. And as Ella faces this truth, she realizes that nothing will ever be the same again. Ella couldn't shake the unease that had taken root in her heart. It had been weeks since Ethan began speaking of his real mom and the mysterious well behind their house. Every time he spoke of her, Ella felt a chill crawl up her spine. His descriptions, detailed, clear, and haunting, began to weigh on her mind, and the more Ethan spoke, the less she was able to dismiss his words as childish fantasies. The clarity with which he recalled the tragic events surrounding his biological mother was troubling. It was as if the child was reliving something he had never witnessed, but somehow knew all too well. Daniel, her husband, had a different perspective. His response was always the same. "It's just a phase, he'll get over it." He had brushed off Ethan's vivid memories as nothing more than the wild imaginations of a young child. But Ella wasn't so sure. She couldn't ignore the growing knot in her stomach, the way Ethan's eyes would glaze over with a faraway look whenever he spoke of his mother in the well. The fear and sadness in his voice seemed too real to be just a story. Something inside her told her that there was more to this than met the eye. In a desperate attempt to find some answers, Ella made an appointment with Dr. Beatrice Carter, a renowned child psychologist who had experience working with children who had undergone trauma. She had heard of Dr. Carter through a friend and was hopeful that the psychologist could offer some insight into Ethan's behavior. After all, it wasn't normal for a child to have such vivid, haunting memories at such a young age. Ella needed help. Something was clearly not right, and she was determined to uncover the truth. The day of the appointment, Ella felt a mixture of anxiety and hope. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she was praying that Dr. Carter would be able to offer some clarity. The psychologist's office was cozy and inviting, with soft lighting and comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. Dr. Carter, a woman in her 40s with short dark hair and warm eyes, greeted Ella with a reassuring smile. After exchanging pleasantries, Ella explained the situation, recounting Ethan's strange claims and the growing sense of unease that had been plaguing her. Dr. Carter listened attentively, her face serious but compassionate. After a few moments of silence, she finally spoke. "Ella, I want you to understand that what Ethan is describing might not be as simple as a child's imagination running wild. It's possible that Ethan is experiencing what we call dissociative amnesia, a form of memory loss typically caused by trauma. The fact that he has such vivid memories of events that should have occurred before he even had the cognitive ability to remember them is concerning. Children who experience severe trauma can sometimes have fragmented memories, bits and pieces of events that their mind tries to process, but in a way that's disjointed and difficult to understand." Ella was taken aback. "Dissociative amnesia," she repeated, trying to make sense of the term. "Yes, it's when someone's mind dissociates from the traumatic experience, essentially blocking out the details in a way that protects them from the pain. However, sometimes those memories resurface in strange ways. In Ethan's case, it seems like he might have a fragmented memory of a traumatic event, possibly the death of his biological mother." Ella's heart raced at the mention of Ethan's mother. Could it be true? Had Ethan witnessed something so horrific that his mind had blocked it out? The pieces of the puzzle seemed to be falling into place, but they only raised more questions. "Do you think he could be remembering something from his past?" Ella asked, her voice trembling slightly. "It's possible," Dr. Carter said gently. "In some cases, traumatic memories are so deeply buried that they don't resurface until much later in life. But when they do, they come in flashes, fragments of the past that the individual has no conscious understanding of. The memories can come out in dreams, flashbacks, or in the form of vivid recurring thoughts, as we're seeing with Ethan." Ella sat back in her chair, digesting the information. A part of her still wanted to deny it, to believe that Ethan was simply making things up. But the more she listened to Dr. Carter, the more she realized that Ethan's behavior wasn't as simple as childish fantasy. The memories he spoke of his mother's fall, the blue dress, the sense of fear and loss seemed too real, too vivid to be dismissed as mere imagination. "Dr. Carter continued, "What you're describing sounds like Ethan may have witnessed something traumatic at a very young age, something that his mind has tried to protect him from. It could be the death of his biological mother, and perhaps even his involvement in the event, either by witnessing it or being in close proximity to it. These types of memories are difficult for anyone to process, especially for a child." Ella's mind raced as she thought about the possibility of Ethan being exposed to such a horrific event at such a young age. She couldn't imagine the pain and trauma he must have gone through, but why hadn't she known? How could she have missed the signs? "Is there anything I can do?" Ella asked, her voice full of concern. "How do I help him?" Dr. Carter paused for a moment, considering the question. "The most important thing right now is to make sure Ethan feels safe. He needs to know that you believe him, and that you're not dismissing his experiences. The trauma he's experienced is real, even if his memories are fragmented. It's also essential to approach this delicately. Forcing him to remember too much too quickly can sometimes do more harm than good. A therapist experienced in trauma should work with him gradually to help him process these memories at a pace that feels manageable." Ella nodded, trying to absorb everything Dr. Carter was saying. "And what about Daniel? He doesn't believe any of this. He thinks it's all just nonsense. It's going to be difficult." Dr. Carter acknowledged, but for Ethan to heal, it's important that both of you are on the same page. He needs to feel supported, and that support needs to come from both of you. If Daniel is dismissing Ethan's experiences, it might cause Ethan to feel like his feelings aren't valid. That could make it harder for him to open up and process the trauma. Ella felt a pang of guilt. She had been so focused on trying to protect Daniel from the truth, from the idea that their family could be hiding something dark, that she hadn't fully considered the impact it might have on Ethan. She needed to approach this situation with more compassion for both her son and her husband. Dr. Carter stood up, signaling the end of the session. Ella, I know this is a lot to take in, but the most important thing right now is to be there for Ethan. Help him feel heard, help him feel safe, and together we'll work through this. Ella left Dr. Carter's office with a heavy heart, but also with a sense of determination. She couldn't deny the possibility any longer. Ethan's memories, no matter how unbelievable, were real. And it was time to confront the past, no matter how painful it might be. For Ethan's sake, for his healing, she would do whatever it took. The truth would come out and together they would face it. For years, Ethan's insistence on the truth about his biological mother, who he claimed was buried in the well behind the house, was dismissed as nothing more than the fanciful imaginings of a young child. His adoptive parents, Ella and Daniel, brushed off his claims, attributing them to his wild imagination, perhaps exacerbated by a traumatic past that he couldn't fully comprehend. But as time passed, Ethan's determination only grew. It was as though a part of him could not let go of the truth, no matter how hard he tried to suppress it. Ethan had always been different. There was something about the way he spoke of his mother Anna, and the well that didn't sit right with those around him. Ella tried to dismiss it as nothing more than a passing phase after all. What child doesn't tell stories? But there was something unsettling about the clarity with which Ethan recalled events that he could not possibly have witnessed. He was only 4 years old when he first started speaking of his real mother, describing vivid details about the woman in the blue dress and the fall that led to her death. He spoke with such certainty that it was impossible to ignore the creeping feeling of doubt that started to gnaw at Ella's mind. As Ethan grew older, the memories did not fade. They became more vivid, more consistent. He spoke of his mother with a mixture of sadness and longing, detailing the circumstances surrounding her death, as if he had been there standing by helplessly watching her fall into the well. He could recall the specific shade of blue her dress had been, and the fear in her eyes as she fell. These weren't the ramblings of a child playing make-believe. They were the words of someone who had witnessed something terrible, something that had left an indelible mark on his soul. Ella tried to ignore it, telling herself that Ethan was simply still processing his early years, but deep down, she knew there was more to the story. She couldn't shake the feeling that Ethan's memories were not just the product of an overactive imagination. Something didn't add up. She had always believed that she and Daniel had provided a loving home for Ethan after his adoption. But as time went on, the cracks in their family dynamic began to show. Ella began to wonder whether there were things about Ethan's past that Daniel was hiding, things that she hadn't known when she brought him into their home. It wasn't until the adoption papers resurfaced years later that the truth began to take shape. The vague and incomplete documents surrounding Ethan's adoption began to look more suspicious. The paperwork, that should have been straightforward, was strangely devoid of crucial details. The name of the person who had arranged the adoption, the intermediary who had handled everything, was suspiciously absent. Ella had always trusted Daniel, but now she couldn't help but question everything. Why had he been so insistent on keeping Ethan's past hidden? Why had he not told her more about the circumstances of Ethan's adoption? The turning point came when Ella finally confronted Daniel about the inconsistencies she had discovered in the adoption documents. She had always trusted him, but now something in her gut told her that there was more to the story than she had been told. The confrontation was heated. Daniel was defensive, his temper flaring as Ella laid out her findings. He insisted that there was nothing wrong with the documents, that they had simply been handled in a way that was common for adoptions at the time. But the more Ella pressed, the more she began to unravel the truth. It wasn't long before Ella's suspicions were confirmed. After further digging, she uncovered the name of Ethan's biological mother, Anna Oliver. The pieces started to fall into place. Anna, a young woman who had worked as a maid for Daniel, and his family had disappeared mysteriously several years ago. Her disappearance had never been investigated thoroughly, and her name had been all but forgotten until now. Ethan's memories, vivid and unrelenting, seemed to hold the key to unlocking the dark secret that Daniel had buried for years. Ella's heart sank as she pieced together the details. Anna Oliver had been murdered. There was no other explanation. It became clear that Daniel, her adoptive father, had been involved. He had been the one to push her down the well, silencing her for good. The more Ella thought about it, the more the pieces of the puzzle fit together. Daniel had murdered Anna likely because she had threatened to expose their affair, and then he had buried her body in the well behind their house to cover up his crime. He had then gone on to adopt her son Ethan and raise him as his own, hoping that the past would remain hidden forever. But Ethan had never forgotten, and over the years, the truth had slowly bubbled to the surface. As the truth began to emerge, Ella found herself torn between her love for Ethan and the betrayal she felt by Daniel. She had always believed in the family they had built together, but now she realized that everything had been built on lies. The man she had married, the man she had trusted with her heart and her home, had committed an unspeakable act. He had murdered an innocent woman and buried her in the yard, all while pretending to be the loving father to Ethan. The revelation shattered Ella's world. But even as she struggled with the enormity of the betrayal, Ella knew she had to do what was right for Ethan. She couldn't allow the truth to remain buried any longer. She began to take action, reaching out to the authorities and speaking to a lawyer about what she had uncovered. It wasn't long before the case was reopened and Daniel was arrested for his role in Anna Oliver's murder. The investigation revealed the full extent of Daniel's lies and manipulation, and the town was rocked by the truth. For Ethan, the discovery was both a relief and a curse. He had always known that something wasn't right, but the truth was more horrifying than he could have ever imagined. He had spent years haunted by the memories of his mother, and now he knew why. The well behind the house, the one that had always seemed so ordinary, had been the final resting place for his biological mother's body. The truth had finally come to light, but the cost was high. Ethan had lost the family he had once known, and he was left to pick up the pieces of his broken past. But there was a sense of closure in the truth. Ethan was finally able to give his mother the justice she had been denied for so many years. The memories that had once haunted him were no longer just fragments of a broken past. They were the keys to exposing the lies and uncovering the truth. In the end, Ethan had found the strength to confront the darkness, to unearth the truth from the well, and to reclaim his identity as the son of Anna Oliver. The journey was long and painful, but Ethan emerged from it stronger, more determined, and with a sense of purpose. He had uncovered the truth about his mother's death, but more than that, he had reclaimed his own story. A story that had been hidden beneath lies, silence, and the darkness of the past. As he moved forward, Ethan knew that the truth would always be his guiding light, no matter how painful or difficult it might be to face. For years, Ethan had lived with the haunting memories of his past, vivid recollections that never seemed to fade with time. His claim that his real mother was in the well behind the house had been dismissed by everyone around him as just a child's fantasy. Yet the more Ethan grew, the clearer the details of his memories became. The image of the woman in the blue dress falling into the well remained etched in his mind. He remembered the desperation in her eyes, the cold, suffocating darkness of the well, and the feeling of being unable to help her. Despite the ridicule and dismissal from his adoptive parents, Daniel and Ella Ethan could not shake the nagging feeling that there was something more to his memories. For years he had been denied the truth, forced to live in a world built on lies. But now, with each passing day, the need to know the truth grew stronger. He couldn't ignore the feeling that something had happened, a tragedy that no one had ever spoken of, something buried deep beneath the surface, hidden for years. The breakthrough came when Ethan decided he could no longer sit idly by. He had to take matters into his own hands. After all, no one else seemed willing to take him seriously. His adoptive father Daniel had always been dismissive of Ethan's claims, and Ella, though more sympathetic, seemed unable to accept the possibility that there was a dark truth buried beneath the layers of their carefully constructed life. Ethan was determined to find the truth, no matter the cost. He began by applying for permission to excavate the well in the backyard, a place that had always haunted his dreams. The well, once a symbol of fear and uncertainty, now represented the key to unlocking the mysteries of his past. His decision was not taken lightly, but Ethan knew it was the only way to put his mind at ease. He had to know what had happened to Anna, the woman he had always believed to be his mother, Ethan's neighbor Max, a man who had lived in the town for years and was aware of the stories surrounding the well, agreed to help him. Max, though initially skeptical, had always been a good friend to Ethan. He had watched him grow up, and over the years he had come to respect Ethan's determination. When Ethan asked for his help, Max didn't hesitate. Together, they would uncover what had been buried for so long. The process of obtaining permission to dig up the well was not easy. Local authorities were wary of Ethan's request, especially since there were no concrete reasons to believe that something illegal or criminal had occurred there. However, with Max's support and the town's growing curiosity about Ethan's claims, the town council eventually granted him permission to begin the excavation. It was a long shot, but Ethan was determined. He was willing to risk everything to uncover the truth. The day they began digging, the air was thick with anticipation. Neighbors gathered to watch, their curiosity piqued by the years of rumors that surrounded the well. The once ordinary piece of land had become a symbol of something far darker, a place where secrets had been buried both figuratively and literally. Ethan stood at the edge of the excavation site, his heart racing as Max operated the excavator. As the machine began to break through the layers of earth, the weight of what they were doing began to sink in. Each shove of dirt that was displaced brought them closer to the truth, but also closer to a painful reality that Ethan had been unwilling to fully acknowledge until now. He had lived with the fear that the truth might be too much to bear, but the need to know outweighed that fear. The digging continued for hours, the machine's roar cutting through the silence of the yard. As the day wore on, the first signs of something unusual began to emerge. The ground was damp, and the smell of earth filled the air. Beneath the soil they uncovered what appeared to be an old, partially collapsed stone structure, a crude seal of cement and bricks that had been hastily placed over the well's mouth. The seal, Ethan noted, was not professionally done. It looked as though someone had tried to cover up the well, burying it to erase any trace of its existence. His stomach churned. This was no ordinary sealing. This was an attempt to conceal something or someone with a mixture of dread and anticipation. Ethan urged Max to continue. He needed to know what was hidden beneath. After some time, the seal was broken open, revealing a dark, foul-smelling air that rushed up from the depths. The smell was unbearable, but Ethan didn't care. He had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The light from Max's flashlight revealed what they had feared. A body, a pale, lifeless figure, lay at the bottom of the well, half buried in dirt and debris. It was clear that the body had been down there for years. As the flashlight illuminated the scene, Ethan's heart stopped. He could see the remnants of a blue dress still visible despite the passage of time. He knew without a doubt that this was Anna, the woman who had haunted his dreams for years, the woman whose memory had been buried along with her body. Ethan stepped forward, his body trembling with a mixture of shock, relief, and horror. This was the truth he had been searching for. His mother, Anna, had been murdered. The pieces of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. Anna had been killed by Daniel, his adoptive father. The realization hit him like a wave, drowning him in a sea of emotions. He had always suspected that Daniel had something to do with Anna's disappearance, but now he had the proof. The man he had once called father was responsible for the death of his real mother. The neighbors who had gathered to watch the excavation stood in stunned silence. The discovery was nothing short of extraordinary. What had started as a child's tale dismissed by everyone as a delusion had now become undeniable truth. The well, once a place of fear and superstition, had become the key to unlocking a horrific family secret. Ethan couldn't tear his eyes away from the body, his mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. There was no more denying the truth. Anna's death had been a crime, and Daniel had committed it to protect his own reputation. But now, with the evidence uncovered, justice could be served. Ethan stood tall, his heart heavy but resolute. He had found the truth, and now he would make sure that Anna's memory would no longer be buried. The police were called, and soon the scene was swarming with officers and forensic teams. The body was carefully extracted and taken for examination. As the investigation began, Ethan stood by, his heart in his throat. He had always feared this moment, but now that it had come, he felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The truth had finally been brought to light. Max, who had stood by Ethan throughout the entire ordeal, placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Ethan," he said quietly. "You uncovered the truth. You brought her home." Ethan nodded, his eyes locked on the scene before him. "It's not over yet," he whispered. "But it will be for her. For me." As the police continued their work, Ethan felt a shift within himself. He had uncovered the truth about his mother's death, but there was still more to be done. Daniel would face justice for his crimes, and Ethan would finally be free of the shadows that had haunted him for so long. He had unearthed the truth, and now it was time to face the consequences. For Ethan, the journey of digging up the past had been painful, but it was also liberating. In uncovering the truth, he had reclaimed his identity, his past, and the memory of his real mother. No longer would Anna be forgotten, buried beneath lies and silence. Her name would be spoken, and her story would be told. And for Ethan, that was the first step toward healing. The truth had been buried for years, hidden beneath layers of lies and fear, but now it was all coming to the surface. Ethan had always known deep down that something wasn't right. His memories, vivid and haunting, had guided him toward the truth. He had always believed his real mother, Anna Oliver, was in the well behind Daniel's house. As he grew older, his suspicions only deepened. No matter how many people dismissed his claims as a child's delusion, no matter how many times they told him to forget the past, Ethan couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something more, something buried deep within the well that had to be uncovered. Now, standing at the crossroads of his life, Ethan was finally ready to face the truth. With the well unearthed, and Anna's body found, the pieces of the puzzle had started to fall into place. But the moment the body was discovered, Ethan knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger and far more dangerous journey. He had spent years fighting against his adoptive father, Daniel's deceit. But now he needed to confront the terrifying reality: Daniel had murdered Anna. And for years, Ethan had lived under the false pretense that Daniel was his father. The forensic tests began almost immediately, as the police worked tirelessly to confirm what they already suspected. The body unearthed from the old well was that of Anna Oliver. Her blue dress, partially visible despite the years of decay, was a haunting reminder of the night she fell into the well, and Ethan's memories flooded his mind once more. But the real question remained: could they prove what had happened to Anna? Could they confirm that Daniel had been responsible for her death, and that Ethan's memories, which had been dismissed for so long, were in fact the truth? Days after the body was recovered, the forensic team delivered the results that Ethan had both feared and hoped for. The DNA tests confirmed that Ethan was indeed Anna Oliver's biological son, the woman he had always felt a deep, inexplicable connection to in his dreams. The woman he had seen falling into the well was his mother. The forensic results confirmed it all. Anna Oliver had died from blunt force trauma to the skull, resulting in internal bleeding. The injuries matched the description Ethan had given of the night his real mother died, the night he had seen Daniel, the man who had raised him, standing at the edge of the well. The truth was undeniable now. Ethan wasn't just the adopted son of Daniel Sullivan. He was Anna Oliver's son, and Daniel had murdered her. There had been no other explanation for her disappearance. The adoption papers that had always seemed vague, the secrecy surrounding Ethan's birth, and the strange behavior of Daniel, all of it pointed back to the same horrifying conclusion: Anna had been murdered, and Ethan had been kept in the dark for over 2 decades. As Ethan stood before the evidence, the full weight of the situation crashed down on him. His adoptive father, the man who had raised him, the man who had told him countless lies about his past, was the one responsible for Anna's death. Daniel had murdered his real mother in cold blood and had buried her in the well, hidden away from the world, so that no one would ever know the truth. For years, Daniel had lived with the guilt of his crime, but instead of confessing, he had continued to lie, building a life on a foundation of deception. The results of the DNA tests didn't just confirm Ethan's biological relationship to Anna, they confirmed his memories were not fabricated. His recollections, which had been dismissed as childish fantasies, were in fact the truth. Ethan had seen his mother's fall into the well, and although he had been only a child at the time, his mind had stored the traumatic event with startling clarity. He remembered the details of that night: the woman in the blue dress, the scream, the darkness, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness. As much as he had tried to suppress those memories, as much as Daniel had tried to tell him that it was all in his head, Ethan had known deep down that he had witnessed the truth. Daniel, however, was not ready to face the consequences of his actions. The news of the forensic results hit him like a punch to the gut. His entire world was falling apart. The walls he had built around himself, walls made of lies and manipulation, were crumbling, and the truth was impossible to ignore. The man who had once been a respected figure in the town, who had worked his way up to a position of power, was now revealed for what he truly was: a murderer, a liar, and a man who had spent his entire life hiding the truth from his family and the world. The police began to piece together the events that had led up to Anna's death. It was revealed that Anna had been working as a maid for Daniel when their affair had begun. She had become pregnant, and when she threatened to expose the relationship, Daniel had been consumed by fear. Fear of the scandal, fear of losing control, and most of all, fear of the truth coming to light. In a moment of desperation, Daniel had decided that the only way to protect himself was to kill Anna to silence her forever. And so in the dead of night, he had pushed her into the well, burying her body to cover up his crime. As Ethan stood on the precipice of this revelation, a sense of disbelief washed over him. The man he had called his father, the man he had trusted for years, had committed an unforgivable act. For so long, Ethan had felt disconnected, as though he didn't truly belong in the family he had been adopted into. Now, with the truth laid bare before him, he realized why. He hadn't belonged because he wasn't part of Daniel's world. He was the child of a murdered woman, and Daniel had kept him locked in a life of secrecy and lies. As the police investigation continued, Daniel's role in Anna's death became clearer, and the charges against him grew. He was arrested for the murder of Anna Oliver, the concealment of her body, and the forgery of Ethan's adoption papers. The truth was out, and there would be no hiding from the consequences of his actions. For Ethan, the journey was far from over. He had spent his entire life searching for answers, and now that he had them, he was left to reconcile with the truth. But as painful as it was to learn of the atrocities committed by the man he had called his father, Ethan found some solace in the fact that Anna's memory had not been completely erased. Her name was finally being spoken, and the truth was being heard. The quiet, relentless pursuit of justice had brought the truth to light, and Ethan had become the living testament to the strength of the human spirit. He had reclaimed his identity, and in doing so, he had reclaimed his mother's legacy. For the first time in his life, Ethan could look to the future, knowing that the past, though painful and dark, would no longer define him. The truth had been confirmed, and with it, Ethan could finally begin to heal. The moment Ethan stood at the edge of the well, looking down into the depths where the truth had been buried for so long, he knew his journey had reached its final chapter. The years of torment, the nightmares, the whispered doubts, and the haunting memories, all of it had led him to this point. The well had always been a symbol for him, a dark and silent keeper of secrets. But now, it was more than just a physical location. It was the portal through which the truth about his biological mother, Anna Oliver, could finally emerge. The excavation had been difficult, and the moment the body was discovered, everything that Ethan had always felt deep in his bones was confirmed. The forensic tests, the DNA results, and the cold, hard evidence all pointed to the same terrifying conclusion: Daniel, his adoptive father, had killed Anna. The man who had raised him, the man he had loved and trusted for so long, was revealed to be a murderer. For years, Daniel had been hiding behind a carefully constructed facade of respectability, a facade that had now come crashing down, revealing the dark truth of his actions. Anna's body, found at the bottom of the well, was the key that unlocked everything. It was a powerful moment, one that left Ethan with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that the truth had finally come to light, but sorrow because the realization of what Daniel had done shattered the foundation of everything Ethan had believed in. For so many years, Daniel had played the role of a caring father, a man who had given him a home and a sense of belonging. But the reality was that Daniel had murdered Anna, and Ethan had been living under a lie for his entire life. As the police processed the scene and took the remains for further examination, Daniel's role in Anna's death became clearer. The forensic test confirmed that Anna had been murdered, and the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the skull. This wasn't just an accident. It was an intentional act driven by Daniel's fear and desperation. Anna had threatened to expose their affair and her pregnancy, and Daniel, consumed by the need to protect his reputation, had decided to silence her. He had pushed her into the well, leaving her to die alone in the darkness, buried under the weight of a false story that he had created to cover his crime. For Ethan, the confirmation of his mother's death was a moment of unbearable pain, but it was also a moment of profound clarity. All the memories that had tormented him for years, the visions of Anna in the blue dress, the image of her falling into the well, the feeling of helplessness and despair were no longer just dreams. They were real. He had seen it happen. He had witnessed the truth long before anyone else had been willing to believe him, and now the evidence was undeniable. The legal process was swift as the police moved forward with their investigation. Daniel was arrested for the murder of Anna Oliver, the concealment of her body, and the forgery of adoption documents. The weight of the charges was immense, and as Daniel was taken into custody, Ethan could feel a sense of justice finally beginning to take shape. For years, Daniel had manipulated the truth, crafting a false narrative about Ethan's origins and trying to control the narrative of their lives. But now the truth was no longer something that could be ignored or hidden. The media quickly picked up the story, and the small town of Silverwood, which had long been the backdrop for Ethan's search for answers, was thrust into the spotlight. The case became a national sensation, with reporters and news outlets covering every detail of the investigation. People who had once doubted Ethan, who had whispered behind his back about his strange memories and his odd behavior, now saw him in a different light. He wasn't the crazy boy with delusions anymore. He was a victim, and his fight for the truth had brought him justice. For Ethan, the revelation of Daniel's crimes was both a victory and a loss. The man who had raised him, who had been both a father and a monster, was now facing the consequences of his actions. But the damage had already been done. The years of emotional abuse, the years of living under the weight of a lie, could never be undone. Ethan had to come to terms with the fact that the man he had called father was capable of such a horrific act, and he had to find a way to reconcile his feelings of betrayal, anger, and sadness with the reality that justice was being served. The legal proceedings moved forward, and Daniel's trial began. As the courtroom filled with witnesses, lawyers, and media representatives, Ethan sat in the front row, his heart heavy with the burden of the truth. He was no longer just a victim. He was now a symbol of the strength it took to confront the past and demand justice. As the prosecution laid out the case against Daniel, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. It became clear that Daniel had not only murdered Anna, but he had also forged Ethan's adoption papers to keep him in the dark about his true identity. He had stolen Anna's life, and in doing so, he had stolen Ethan's birthright. When Daniel finally took the stand, his demeanor was cold and detached. He refused to admit to his crimes, instead, clinging to the delusion that he had done nothing wrong. His defense was a weak one, built on the idea that he had only done what had to be done to protect his family. But the evidence was overwhelming. The DNA tests, the forensic evidence, and Ethan's testimony all pointed to one irrefutable truth. Daniel had murdered Anna, and he had tried to cover it up for over 20 years. In the end, the jury convicted Daniel of murder, body concealment, and forgery. He was sentenced to life in prison, a sentence that would ensure he would never see the outside world again. For Ethan, the conviction brought a sense of closure, but it did not erase the pain he had spent his whole life searching for the truth, and now that he had it, he could finally begin to heal. The process would not be easy, and the scars left by the trauma would take time to fade, but Ethan had come through the darkness, and he had found justice. The case against Daniel Sullivan sent ripples through the community as people began to reflect on the consequences of keeping secrets and burying the truth. Ethan's courage in the face of overwhelming odds became an inspiration to others who had lived with their own hidden traumas. His story was one of resilience, of finding the strength to confront the past, no matter how painful, and of refusing to be silenced by fear or shame. As the legal process concluded, and the truth was finally acknowledged, Ethan took a deep breath. He had found justice for his mother. He had uncovered the truth about his past, and in doing so, he had freed himself from the shadows that had loomed over him for so long. It was a bittersweet victory, but it was his victory, nonetheless. Ethan's long journey to uncover the truth had come to an end, and as he stood in the courtroom, looking at the man who had once been his father, He knew that the truth had not only set him free, but had also brought justice to the memory of Anna Oliver. The past could no longer haunt him, for the truth had emerged from the well, and with it the promise of a future where no one would be silenced again. After years of struggling with the past, confronting painful truths, and navigating the complexities of grief and betrayal, Ethan finally found the strength to build something positive from the ruins of his life. The truth about his biological mother, Anna Oliver, had taken so long to surface, buried deep in the past, like a hidden treasure waiting to be unearthed. But now that the truth had come to light, Ethan understood that he couldn't let Anna's memory fade again. He couldn't let the pain of her death and the years of silence be for nothing. So he decided to honor her, to honor the woman whose life had been taken too soon, whose memory had been denied, and whose dreams had been buried with her. In the wake of Daniel's arrest and the community's overwhelming support, Ethan founded the Anna Oliver Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting single mothers and abused children. The foundation's mission was clear: to give a voice to those who had been silenced, to provide resources for women who had been abandoned or mistreated, and to offer shelter and hope to children who had been neglected or traumatized. For Ethan, this was not just a charitable endeavor. It was a way to make amends for all the pain Anna had endured in silence, a way to create something that could carry her spirit forward and help others who were suffering in ways no one could see. The foundation quickly gained traction, supported by local communities, activists, and even survivors of abuse who had found their own path to healing. It became a beacon of hope for families who were in need of assistance. Ethan worked tirelessly with a small team of dedicated volunteers, helping raise awareness and fund programs aimed at providing shelter, education, therapy, and job opportunities for women and children who had nowhere else to turn. The foundation also became a safe space where survivors could come together and share their stories, drawing strength from one another and realizing that they were not alone in their pain. Through the foundation, Ethan also provided scholarships for children who had been victims of abuse, giving them access to education and resources they otherwise wouldn't have had. It was his way of paying forward the opportunities he had received and giving others the chance to have a life that wasn't defined by trauma. His dedication to helping others and ensuring that no child was left to suffer in silence was rooted in the painful realization that had it not been for Anna's tragic fate, he might never have known the depth of his own strength and resilience. But as Ethan worked to heal others, he knew that part of his healing journey had to involve fulfilling Anna's dream, a dream that had been taken away from her far too soon. During the months after her body was discovered, Ethan had learned more about Anna's life, her hopes, and her aspirations. One of the things that struck him the most was how simple her dreams were. Anna had always wanted to open a small cafe, a cozy place where people could gather, enjoy a cup of coffee, and find solace in a peaceful atmosphere. It was a dream she had nurtured while working as a maid in Daniel's household, a dream she had shared with those who knew her well. She had always planned to combine her love of baking with her passion for providing warmth and comfort to others. And now Ethan knew he had the opportunity to make that dream a reality. So he opened Anna's Cafe, a small but charming cafe located in the heart of Silverwood. The cafe became more than just a business. It was a tribute to Anna's spirit. Her kindness and her unwavering love for her son Ethan wanted to create a space that felt like home. A place where people could not only enjoy delicious food and drinks, but also feel a sense of community and belonging. He named it after Anna, not just to honor her, but to make sure her memory lived on in the lives of the people who walked through the door. The cafe was filled with Anna's favorite things. It had the warm, inviting atmosphere she had always dreamed of. The walls were adorned with photographs of the countryside, cozy corners with soft cushions, and shelves lined with books and old records. The menu featured some of Anna's favorite dishes, including freshly baked pastries, homemade soups, and of course her signature blueberry muffins, which became a favorite among the regulars. Anna's dream of creating a welcoming space for others was realized in every cup of coffee served and in every smile exchanged between strangers who found themselves in the cafe, brought together by the warmth of the place. But the cafe wasn't just a business for Ethan, it was a labor of love. It was a way to ensure that Anna's legacy lived on in a way that would inspire others. Every time he entered the cafe, Ethan could feel her presence in the air, as if she were watching over him, smiling with pride at what he had accomplished. It was as if she had always known that he would fulfill her dream, that he would create a life of purpose and meaning in her memory. As the cafe grew in popularity, it became a place where people came to not only enjoy a good meal, but to connect with others. Local artists performed live music on weekends, and community groups held meetings there discussing everything from literature to social justice. It wasn't just a place to eat. It was a hub for creativity, for ideas, and for the kind of connection that was often missing in the fast-paced world outside. People came not only for the food, but for the feeling that they were part of something bigger, a community that cared about one another, a community that valued connection and compassion. Through the cafe and the foundation, Ethan began to find his own healing. He found that giving to others, offering support, and creating spaces of safety and comfort helped him reclaim his own sense of self-worth. The nightmares, the trauma, and the years of fear slowly faded as he poured his heart into his work. Knowing that Anna would have been proud of him, he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was thriving, and he was helping others do the same. But there were still moments when Ethan would pause looking out the window of the cafe, or walking through the garden, and he would feel a deep sense of longing for Anna. He missed her, even though he never truly had the chance to know her as a mother. He missed the life that could have been the life that was stolen from both of them. And yet he had learned that grief was a part of life just as healing was. There would always be a part of him that carried the pain of losing her. But there was also a part of him that carried the joy of knowing that he had honored her memory in the most meaningful way possible. Ethan knew that his work was far from over. The foundation continued to grow, touching more lives and providing hope to those who needed it most. And as he stood in the cafe one evening watching the sun set over the garden where Anna's favorite flowers bloomed, Ethan realized that he had come full circle. He had been a lost child searching for answers in the darkness of his past. But now he was a man who had found peace, not just for himself, but for others as well. Anna's dream was no longer a lost dream. It was alive in the smiles of the people who walked through the cafe doors and the hands that worked together to build a better world for children and mothers who needed it most. In the end, Ethan had rebuilt a life from the ashes of his past, and in doing so, he had honored the woman who had given him life, even if that life was taken from her too soon. He had become a symbol of resilience, of hope, and of the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. The cafe, the foundation, and the community he had built were a testament to the truth that no matter how deeply the past is buried, the love and the dreams of those who came before us can always rise again. Ethan stood alone in the quiet cafe, the last customers of the evening having just left, their laughter still lingering in the air. The soft hum of the refrigerator and the clink of cups in the kitchen were the only sounds that filled the room now. He ran his hand over the smooth countertop, the memories flooding back as he gazed at the familiar walls that had once seemed so daunting, so filled with unanswered questions. This cafe. Anna's cafe had become so much more than just a business. It was a symbol of everything he had fought for. It was a monument to his journey to the truth that had been buried for so long, and to the woman he had never truly known, but whose presence had shaped his life in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. It had been a long, painful road, one that had led him through dark places, through anger and confusion, and through the deepest moments of grief and loss. But it had also been a journey of healing, of reclaiming his truth, and of finding the courage to forgive. Ethan had always wondered why he had been so drawn to the past, so insistent on uncovering the truth about his biological mother Anna. He had spent years piecing together fragments of memories, his vivid dreams, his haunting recollections of the well, and his disturbing sense of loss. The years of uncertainty, of doubting his own mind, had been the hardest, but now as he stood in the cafe he had opened in Anna's memory, he understood. His journey had not only been about finding her, it had been about finding himself. The night Anna had died had never left him. In his dreams he had been a child again, standing by the well, watching her fall, unable to reach her. It was a nightmare that had haunted him for years, but it was more than a nightmare. It was a memory that had never truly been lost, buried deep within him, until he was brave enough to face it. He had finally found the strength to dig through the layers of denial, through the silence that had surrounded his adoption and uncover the truth that had been hidden from him for so long. It had been a hard truth to swallow. The revelation that Daniel, the man who had raised him, was the one responsible for Anna's death, had shattered everything Ethan had known about his life. For so long he had trusted Daniel had called him. Dad had believed that this man was his protector. The betrayal had been more than just the murder of Anna. It had been the years of manipulation, the years of pretending that nothing was wrong. Ethan had struggled to reconcile the man who had raised him with the man who had taken the life of the woman who had given him life. It had been a painful, ugly truth to face. But in the end, it was the truth that set him free. Once the lies had been stripped away, Ethan had found peace. He had spent years searching for closure for the truth about Anna, for answers to the questions that had haunted him since he was a child. And now, with the foundation he had created in her honor and the cafe he had built in her memory, he had found that peace. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reconciliation. Reconciliation with the past, with himself, and with the people who had played roles in his life. Forgiving Ella had been one of the hardest parts of his journey. She had been his adoptive mother, the woman who had cared for him when he was a child, who had tried to give him a home after his real mother had been taken from him. But Ella had been silent for so long. She had been complicit in the lies, in the denial, in the secrecy. Her silence had been a barrier between them. A barrier that had kept him from fully understanding his past. At first, Ethan had been angry at her for not speaking up sooner, for not challenging Daniel when she had known something was wrong. He had wanted answers, and she had not given him any. But as the years went on, Ethan realized that Ella had been a victim too. She had been trapped in her own fear, her own guilt, and her own confusion. She had tried to protect him in her own way from the painful truth, thinking that silence would shield him from the hurt. Ethan had come to understand that her silence had been born out of fear. Not just fear of Daniel, but fear of losing him. She had been afraid of facing the truth, of admitting the reality of what had happened. But Ethan knew now that her silence had been a form of self-preservation, not malice. And in time, he found it within himself to forgive her. Forgiveness had been the final step in his healing. It had been the hardest part of the journey, but it had also been the most freeing. He had learned that forgiveness wasn't about condoning what had happened or excusing the wrongs that had been done. It was about releasing the anger, the resentment, and the pain that had kept him chained to the past. By forgiving Ella, Ethan had finally freed himself from the weight of the past. He had stopped seeing her as the person who had failed him, and started seeing her as the woman who had loved him in the best way she knew how. The cafe. Anna's cafe had become a place of healing not just for Ethan, but for the community. People came from all over to visit the cafe, to sit and reflect, to talk about their own struggles, and to find comfort in the warmth of the space Ethan had created. The cafe was a symbol of hope and renewal, a place where memories could be honored, where the past could be acknowledged, and where healing could begin. Anna's dream of opening a small cafe had been realized not just in the food and the atmosphere, but in the way it brought people together, in the way it helped them heal. As Ethan sat in the quiet of the cafe one evening, looking out the window at the streetlights glowing softly in the distance, he thought back on everything he had been through. He had found his mother, uncovered the painful truth about his past, and forgave the people who had once meant so much to him. He had started a foundation that helped other children who had been abused or neglected, and he had opened a cafe that honored Anna's memory. He had come so far from the boy who once stood by the well, haunted by nightmares of a woman he couldn't remember. He had found peace, not just for himself, but for Anna, for Ella, and for all the people whose lives he had touched. The journey had been long, but it had led him to a place of healing, of acceptance, and of love. He had finally made peace with his past, and in doing so, he had created a future where his mother's legacy lived on, where her dreams were no longer buried, and where the truth had set him free. In that moment, Ethan knew that he was no longer just a victim of his past. He was a man who had reclaimed his life, his truth, and his peace. And as he looked at the photographs on the walls of the cafe, the pictures of Anna, he smiled, knowing that her spirit would live on forever in the space he had created, a place of healing, of remembrance, and of love. The story of Ethan's journey is one that speaks deeply to the human experience. The unyielding pursuit of truth, the painful but necessary confrontation with the past, and the eventual healing that comes from embracing one's own narrative. It is a reminder that no matter how deeply buried the truth may be, it will always find a way to surface, and those who fight for it will ultimately find peace, even after the most traumatic of experiences. At the heart of the story is Ethan's relentless pursuit of his biological mother, Anna Oliver, and the truth surrounding her death. For years he had carried a haunting memory, a memory of a woman in a blue dress falling into a well, her screams unheard. These memories seemed like nightmares, but Ethan knew deep down that they were something more. They were his past calling out to him, demanding to be acknowledged. In a world that had tried to erase his identity, Ethan never stopped searching for the truth, no matter how painful the process might be. His journey was not just about discovering who his real mother was, but about confronting the past and reclaiming his own story. The truth is often elusive, buried beneath layers of silence, fear, and denial. For Ethan, the truth about his biological mother's death was hidden behind the walls of a family that chose to protect their own secrets, over confronting the uncomfortable reality. His adoptive parents, Ella and Daniel, dismissed his memories as nothing more than childish fantasies, a convenient explanation that allowed them to avoid facing the horror that lay in the past. Ella in particular struggled with her own guilt and fear. She had raised Ethan as her own, but she had never asked the difficult questions about his adoption, or the circumstances surrounding Anna's death. Instead, she chose silence, a silence that ultimately became a barrier between her and Ethan. It was a silence that allowed the trauma to fester, kept Ethan trapped in a maze of confusion, and prevented him from moving forward. But Ethan was not one to give up. His insistence on uncovering the truth eventually led him to the discovery of Anna's remains, and the painful realization that Daniel, the man who had raised him, was involved in her murder. The truth came crashing down in a way that Ethan had never expected yet. It was the only way forward. As painful as it was, uncovering the truth about Anna's death was the only way Ethan could begin to heal. By confronting the reality of his past, he was able to reclaim his life and move beyond the darkness that had held him captive for so long. This story teaches us the importance of facing the past, no matter how difficult or painful it may be. We often choose to bury our trauma, to sweep it under the rug, hoping that it will disappear. But the truth has a way of emerging, sometimes in the form of haunting memories, dreams, or even the quiet voices of those we love. When we choose to confront the past, we allow ourselves the opportunity to heal. It is only by acknowledging the pain that we can begin to move forward. In Ethan's case, his healing did not come overnight. It was a slow, arduous process that involved grappling with anger, betrayal, and grief. But as he worked through these emotions, he also found forgiveness. Forgiving Ella, forgiving Daniel, and even forgiving himself became part of his journey toward peace. Forgiveness does not mean forgetting or excusing the wrongs done, but it does mean letting go of the hold that those wrongs have on us. Ethan's forgiveness was not just for the people who had wronged him, but for himself. By forgiving, he freed himself from the weight of anger and resentment that had kept him tethered to the past. The story also highlights the importance of creating a new narrative, one that acknowledges the trauma, but also allows for healing and growth. Ethan chose to honor his mother's memory by opening Anna's Cafe and starting the Anna Oliver Foundation. He took the pain of his past and transformed it into something that could help others. By sharing his story and creating a space for healing, Ethan allowed his mother's legacy to live on. Anna's dream of opening a cafe, which had been cut short by her death, was realized through Ethan's determination to make something good come from the darkness of his past. The cafe became a place of hope, a place where others could come to heal, share their stories, and find solace. This transformation of pain into purpose is one of the most powerful lessons of the story. Ethan's journey proves that even the most traumatic experiences can lead to something meaningful. The pain of losing a mother, of growing up in a web of lies, of confronting the man who had raised him as a father, all of this could have destroyed Ethan. But instead, he chose to use his story to inspire others. He became a beacon of hope for those who had suffered in silence, for those who had been told their memories didn't matter, for those who had been told their pain didn't count. By living his truth and sharing it with the world, Ethan gave others the permission to do the same. In the end, the story is not just about uncovering the truth, but about healing. It's a testament to the power of facing our deepest fears, of confronting the darkness that we've tried to hide from, and of finding peace in the process. It reminds us that no matter how long it takes, the truth will always come to light, and those who have the courage to seek it will eventually find the healing they deserve. The final lesson of this story is one of resilience and hope. Ethan's journey is a reminder that no matter the depth of the trauma or the pain of the past, healing is possible. We don't have to let our past define us. We have the power to rewrite our story to find peace and to build a future that honors our truth. Ethan's journey is a profound testament to the power of courage and persistence in the face of unimaginable hardship. From a young age, he was haunted by memories of a woman in a blue dress, her screams echoing in the well behind his childhood home. For years, these memories were dismissed as mere fantasies, but Ethan never gave up on seeking the truth. Despite the denial from his adoptive parents and the silence surrounding his past, he remained steadfast in his pursuit of justice for his biological mother, Anna Oliver. The darkness that surrounded Ethan's early life could have easily consumed him. Yet he chose to face the painful truth, no matter how difficult. His courage in the face of such trauma allowed him to unearth the truth about his mother's death, and in the process, brought justice not only for Anna, but for himself. The discovery of his mother's remains and the subsequent confirmation of his memories were pivotal moments in Ethan's healing. Instead of being crushed by the weight of these revelations, he used them as fuel to transform his pain into purpose. By opening Anna's cafe, Ethan fulfilled his mother's dream and created a place of hope and healing for others. The cafe became more than just a business. It was a symbol of resilience, a physical manifestation of Ethan's determination to honor his mother's memory and live a life that was rooted in truth. This act of living her dream allowed Ethan to rewrite his own story and heal from the trauma of his past. His journey reminds us that while the truth may be painful and difficult to confront, it is only by facing those difficult realities that we can truly find peace and healing. Ethan's story is a powerful reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, the pursuit of truth, justice, and healing can transform lives. His courage to persist in the face of adversity shows that no matter how painful the road may be, it's possible to overcome it and emerge stronger. Through his resilience, Ethan demonstrated that healing doesn't just come from understanding the past. It comes from taking action and creating a future that reflects the truth.